When your friend spoke to you in 1959 and first told you about the Watts Towers, how did you become involved with the towers from that point?
It was fascinating because in the article it said that the city determined that the stresses in the members exceed twice the allowable. Now that doesn't mean much to you people, but as an engineer and working in structures, the allowable stress would be how much it could stand without failing. Okay. And the stresses in the members would be exceeding that. So the newspaper was quoting the head of the Department of Building and Safety, called the Conservation Bureau, when they said that the stresses in the members exceeded twice the allowable, and they were apt to fall of their own dead weight, which I realized was a bunch of garbage because they were standing and they had been there for years then. He started them in 1921, and this was in 1959. So for 30-some years, they'd already been standing. So I knew they weren't about to fall down of their own dead weight. And then this woman called me and asked me to join her and go to the Watts Towers. So I was kind of hooked to begin with, because I wanted to find out how they were about to fall down of their own dead weight when they hadn't for 30-some years. The person who made the comment was the head of the department. He was a full-fledged graduate and master's degree in structural stuff. So I knew that he was telling a lie or he didn't know any better, and that was doubtful. I went out to the towers and I checked them out, and I made my own determination that they were not dangerous enough to fall down, because what Rodia did when he built them is he put many members. You can see on this picture here, it doesn't just have one vertical member, it has 8 or 10 or 16. So if it was going to fall down of its own dead weight, it would have to break 16 members made out of steel and cement mortar. And I knew that wasn't about to happen. But I tried to prove it with words and some calculations and diagrams, but that didn't work because they didn't want the towers up. They wanted to get rid of the Watts Towers desperately. They would have done anything to get rid of them. So I was in a demolition hearing.
Okay.
They had a formal, official demolition hearing where they set out to prove to the world that the Watts Towers were dangerous and apt to fall of their own dead weight, which the lie they made up themselves.
Right.
So what I did was I sat in this hearing. It was 16 days of a hearing, and I think he said, how about a load test? Because see, their department was convinced that the Watts Towers really were about to fall over and really would had the stresses, and the members did exceed the allowables. So he had convinced them, there are 40 members of the Building and Safety Department staff. They're all engineers of some kind. There wasn't one aeronautical in there. I found that out because I asked them if they'd done a load test on the winds, and none of them knew anything about wind loads on sculptures like that. So anyway, so we finally agreed. I agreed that I would do a load test, but I said, I got to pick the load. So he said, well, I know what the load is, and he said it was like 35,000 pounds pulling sideways like the wind on one of the tall sculptures.
Okay.
And I said, no, it's nowhere near that, and I'll have to come back tomorrow and tell you what I think it is. So I came back and said it was like 10,000 pounds, not 40 or whatever he said.
Right.
So he finally agreed because he didn't think it would stand up against 5 pounds, I don't think. And so anyway, so I had to design the load test. So I designed the load test. I don't know if there's a picture here, but I wrapped steel, leather bands with steel in it to give a distributed load around the towers, and we wrapped them around a bunch of the members up high in bands of leather with steel in it. And I had a very accurate load because it said 10,000 pounds. I wasn't going to put 10,001 pound on. So I had a load cell and a hydraulic cylinder that we applied the load from across the railroad tracks. Anyway, so we did the load test, on October the 10th, 1959. I did a very fancy test. I had two professors, one from USC, one from UCLA, sitting to be my right arms to see what was happening and watch the deflections that we were measuring with a very fancy device that got invented at the company where I worked, North American Aviation, and no one ever used that before or since. It was a linear deflection transducer with electronics in it that was way ahead of its time because we were working on very fancy airplanes. They designed this device that we hooked up to the towers at about 5 locations, and I had a readout down in the gazebo, which is down at the bottom, one of the shorter towers.
Right.
And I was reading the deflections as they grew, as we put the 1,000 pounds at a time on the towers. So I knew exactly what was going on with the Watts towers, even though I was sitting down below, because we had our transducers telling me from way up high, down 70 feet up, down below. So anyway, we did the test and it was a success. I think we lost one shell, one seashell. There's 44,000 of these on. We lost one seashell out of this load test. And it was a winner. So when it got all done, the head of the building, the safety department, there was a demolition sign on the front of the Watts Towers. It said, "To be demolished." He took it off and handed it to me.
Wow.
But they didn't believe it. They had 40 of their department members there to watch me tear the Watts Towers down that day, but I didn't.